Have you ever faced a situation that seemed impossible to solve? Have you ever looked at your life and wondered, is God really working? Why does everything feel so silent? Today, I want to share with you a story that will transform the way you see silent moments in your life. The story of Esther teaches us that even when we cannot see it, God is in control. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail to fulfill his purposes. Here's a surprising fact. The book of Esther is the only book in the Bible that does not mention God's name directly. Strange, isn't it? But this teaches us something powerful. God doesn't need to be visible to be present. He works in unexpected ways, using ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary plans. Get ready to dive into the journey of a young orphan exiled in a foreign land who became the centerpiece of God's plan to save an entire nation. This story isn't just about Esther. It's about you too, and how God is working in your life, even when everything seems silent. Stay with me until the end of this video. You'll discover practical lessons of faith, courage, and wisdom that can transform your perspective and help you recognize the signs of God's hand in your life. And don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to the channel. Together, let's deepen our relationship with God. Now come with me and see how God turns challenges into victories, and how He might be preparing something extraordinary for your life. Have you ever felt out of place, as if you didn't belong in your environment, like you were too small to handle the challenges around you? That was exactly the reality of the Jewish people in Esther's time. The story begins when the kingdom of Judah was conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, and thousands of Jews were taken captive to Babylon. Decades later, Babylon fell to the powerful Persian Empire, ruled by kings such as Xerxes I, whom the Bible identifies as King Ahasuerus. This kingdom was vast, spanning 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia. For the Jewish people, living under Persian rule meant living without rights and under constant threat. Imagine the feeling of being in a foreign land, unprotected, with no hope for change. Perhaps you've experienced something similar, a moment when you felt helpless, directionless, not knowing what to do. But here's the incredible part. Even when everything seemed lost, God was already working behind the scenes. It's in this context that we are introduced to Esther, a young orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai. To the world, Esther was just another face in the crowd. No status, no resources, no influence. But to God, she was the key piece in a grand plan. And here's the lesson for you. God doesn't need status or position to use you. He chooses the unlikely to accomplish His greatest plans. Just like Esther, you may be in a moment where you feel small, invisible, or even lost. But God is already aligning the details for something greater. While the world saw Esther as just another ordinary person, God saw her as an essential part of His divine purpose. The same might be true for you. Even if things seem confusing today, God never loses control. He is working, even in the silence. Have you ever felt like you were in the wrong place, like your presence in a certain situation didn't make sense? That's likely how Esther felt when she was taken to participate in the selection of a new queen for the vast Persian Empire. It all started when King Ahasuerus made a radical decision. He deposed his queen, Vashti, for refusing to obey an order that likely would have humiliated her. Without a queen on the throne, the king ordered that young women from across the empire be brought in for a selection. Esther, a young Jewish woman without prestige or influence, was one of those chosen. Now imagine the weight of that moment. Esther was an orphan, raised in humble circumstances with no privileges. How could she compete with women from all over Persia, prepared to win the king's favor? Apparently, the odds were against her. But here's one of the greatest secrets of this story. When God chooses someone, He doesn't look at the qualifications the world deems important. God's grace allows you to be chosen, even when it seems impossible. Esther went through a year-long preparation process. During this time, she likely faced insecurities and felt out of place amidst the luxury and customs of the Persian court. Yet God was strategically positioning her. When the time finally came for her to be presented to the king, something extraordinary happened. The Bible says that the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she was crowned queen. But this wasn't luck or coincidence. It was divine providence in action. God already had a greater purpose for Esther, and he placed her exactly where she needed to be. Here's the lesson for your life. When God positions you, it's not for your personal glory, but to fulfill a greater purpose. Perhaps today you find yourself in a place that feels challenging, strange, or uncomfortable. It could be a new job, a difficult situation in your family, or even an unexpected change. Remember, God doesn't make mistakes. He sees what you can't yet see and is preparing you for something extraordinary. Like Esther, trust in God's plan. Even if you don't yet understand why you're where you are, know that He has positioned you for a purpose. Have you ever faced a situation where it felt like everything was conspiring against you? Maybe you felt that someone or something was determined to bring you down. That was the reality of the Jewish people in Esther's time, and the man behind this threat was Haman. Haman was a powerful man in the Persian Empire. He had been promoted to a position of authority directly below the king, and this inflated his pride even more. However, a simple act changed everything. Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refused to bow before him. To Haman, this wasn't just a personal insult, but a direct attack on his ego. What Haman did went far beyond personal vengeance. He didn't just want to punish Mordecai. He planned to annihilate the entire Jewish people. Using his influence, Haman convinced King Ahasuerus to sign a decree ordering the complete destruction of the Jews in a single day. Men, women, children, no one would be spared. Imagine the impact of this. Imagine the despair that gripped Jewish families as they learned the decree was irreversible. The fear, the sense of abandonment, and the helplessness must have been overwhelming. Perhaps you've experienced something similar, a moment when circumstances felt crushing and everything around you seemed lost. But here's the powerful lesson of this story. Even when the enemy seems to have won, God is already working behind the scenes. Haman didn't know that God, in his sovereignty, had already prepared the solution before the problem arose. Esther was in the palace, exactly where she needed to be. And here's a truth you need to hold on to. God is never caught off guard. He sees what's ahead and is already working to bring you victory. Have you ever faced a decision that could change everything? Something that required courage, but also came with great risk. This was the reality Esther faced. When Mordecai learned of the terrible decree to exterminate the Jews, he begged Esther to intercede for her people before the king. But there was a huge problem. No one could approach the king without being summoned under penalty of death. Esther knew that if the king did not extend his golden scepter to her, her life would end right there. It was a moment filled with fear and uncertainty, but this is when Mordecai said something that changed everything. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? Those words echoed in Esther's heart. She understood that her position wasn't for her personal benefit, but to fulfill God's purpose. Courageously, she asked all the Jews to fast and pray for 3 days. Then Esther made her decision. Imagine the weight of that moment. The palace hall was silent. The sound of her footsteps echoed as she approached the throne. All eyes were on her, holding their breath. Would the king extend the scepter? Would Esther be spared? And then something extraordinary happened. The king raised the golden scepter, allowing Esther to approach. But her courage didn't stop there. Esther acted with wisdom and patience, inviting the king and Haman to 2 banquets before revealing her true identity as a Jew and exposing Haman's wicked plan. The result was extraordinary. Haman was hanged on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai, and the Jews were granted permission to defend themselves against their enemies. What seemed impossible became a great victory. Esther teaches us a powerful lesson. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Perhaps you are facing a moment where you need to make a difficult decision, something that requires faith, trust, and a heart full of courage. It could be a challenge in your family, at work, or even in your spiritual walk. Remember Esther. She didn't let fear paralyze her. She trusted in God and acted with wisdom and boldness. Now I ask you, in what area of your life is God calling you to act courageously today? The story of Esther reveals a profound truth. God is in control, even when everything around us seems chaotic and silent. In the book of Esther, God's name is not mentioned even once. No grand miracles or supernatural visions are recorded. Yet we can clearly see his hand guiding every detail, aligning events to fulfill his purposes. This teaches us something essential. God works behind the scenes in our lives, even when we cannot perceive it. How many times have you felt alone, that the challenges in your life were too great for you to bear? Perhaps you are facing something like that right now, a problem that seems impossible to resolve, a crisis that feels like there is no way out. But remember Esther. She was a young orphan, exiled in a foreign land, with no resources or power. In the world's eyes, she was a nobody, but God used her in extraordinary ways to save an entire nation. And here's the truth you need to hold on to. God can use you too. Every difficult moment, every complicated decision is part of God's plan to position you exactly where you need to be. He sees what you cannot see. And just as he was working in Esther's life, he is also working in yours. Maybe what God expects from you today is the courage to act. It's not easy. Esther was afraid too, but she didn't let fear paralyze her. She trusted in God's plan and acted with faith and wisdom. So I ask you, what areas of your life need the courage and confidence Esther had? Where is God calling you to act, even when it seems risky or difficult? Share your response in the comments. Let's grow together in faith and support one another as a community. And don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to the channel for more transformative stories like this one. If you want to go deeper into God's Word and discover more about His plan for your life, I invite you to study theology with us. The information is in the video description. This could be the next step in your spiritual journey. Finally, never forget, God is faithful. Even when everything seems lost, He never abandons His children. Trust in Him because He is in control of your story.